character comes out, there should not be a temptation, but can I do it just once? And what he told me was, he said, with temptation comes a temptation to do an exception once. And once you do it once, then you're gone. And for me, therefore, every time I think of ethics, it is when nobody is watching you, do you have the ability to differentiate between what are your rights to do something versus what is right to do in life? We always have options. You can do 10 different things. But can you make a moral, conscious choice of doing only those things which your consciousness at that point of time, in that context, allows you to do? That is, for me, was ethics, number one. Number two, there would always be temptation to go beyond that and get that thing extra. And it happens to all of us. Charlie said, we're all humans. If we be true to our hearts, have we been ethical all the time? And how do we define ethics? Probably not 100% of the time. But how much can you control your temptation is the true leadership somewhere, I guess. And every time that temptation comes, the whole idea of just taking that one extra exception, I'll do it once, I'll not do it twice. But you take that exception and you're gone. And this is where, I'm just trying to summarize, ethics for me is the ability to differentiate between what are your rights to do versus what is right to do. And Mrs. Menon is here, she's an expert on Indian scriptures, but I just remember a very small thing. In Mahabharata, probably some of you have heard about it, Duryodhan was never considered as a good guy, but if you look at, he never did anything against the letter of the law. He would always stick to that. And every time what he was defying was the spirit of the law. Whereas if you look at Krishna, he would always go by spirit of the law, probably not by letter of the law. Right. So when somebody is not watching you in that darkness, to avoid that temptation and not going for the exception probably defines what can be ethical behavior for us. I would look forward to hear more stories and get engaged in a discussion. But more importantly, get challenged, get your inputs on whatever we discuss. That's what I'll say.
Absolutely. And I think there's a key lesson in there for both Shiv and Gauri, which is make sure we feed these kids ice cream so they don't need to get money for it. Nitya, do you want to comment on?
Well, I have nothing much to say because ethics is something we cannot be taught. And it's something innate. And like everything in the universe, I think ethics and altruism are variables and contextual, relative. Therefore, there's no definite take on ethics. What is ethical to me need not be ethical to somebody else. Cross-culturally, we have different patterns of ethics. In the economic world, where the civilization is predominated by the survival of just the human race, ignoring the mutuality and the interrelationship with the planet, I think the ethics that we practice in the name of progress is definitely dysfunctional. That's my take. And very species-centered. Like a cancer cell living on other cells, I think we are the brain cells of this universe living on other species, one. And two, I don't think there is good or bad. I only think there are possibilities. I believe in human flexibility and not in human incorrigibility. This is my take on ethics.
Okay. That's great. Adi, do you want to add a little to your point of view on ethics and leadership?
I don't have a take on ethics, but I have a take on other stuff, so I'm going to use it. Use it.
It's our panel, so.
Yeah. Yes, actually, I would like to share with you my personal story. Last time I was here in India, it was 5 years ago. I was traveling for 6 months, and we were just talking about it before we were on stage. We went on stage, and I told you that for me, coming back to India was I was terrified. Because the last time I was here, I lost two of the closest people in my life. And one of them was the kid that you mentioned. like you said, when I was 11 and a half year old, I started volunteering in a nonprofit in Israel. And I used to work with a kid that had CP. He couldn't walk and he couldn't talk. And basically, physically, he couldn't do anything by himself. I came to his house when he was 3. And we fell in love. And at that time, my parents got divorced. And I had a lot of financial difficulties in my house. And this kid, his name was Kfir, he became a family to me. He loved me with no conditions, and whenever I cried, he used to cry with me, and whenever I laughed, he used to laugh with me. And like you said, we were like brothers and sisters. And during the years when I grew up next to him, I saw 3 things that happened. One is that when we went outside, when people looked at me, they saw an angel. Someone, that's doing so many wonderful things for the handicapped child, that is taking care of the poor child. And when people looked at him, they saw the disability. They saw the kid that cannot keep his head straight and that cannot do anything physically by himself and cannot walk. And that was very difficult because he was a friend of mine, and I didn't saw myself as a volunteer. Second thing was, whenever I thought of him, I was thinking, okay, what will happen in the future? Will he get married? Will he go and serve at the army, like all Israelis are doing? Will he go to school? Will he graduate? Will he ever go to India? And whenever I thought of those questions, the answer was no. And it wasn't because he can. He can love a woman, and he can go to school, and he can do lots of things, but the society doesn't see it this way. And he doesn't have opportunities in the societies to fulfill his dreams. No one even thinks that he has dreams. And the third thing for me, when I grew up, was the understanding that the biggest need for him was friends. And for people with disabilities in Israel, the biggest need is not therapies, is not treatments, is to have social life. And in Israel, I don't know if you know this, but every teenager is going to youth movement, like Scouts, if you know. And he wasn't accepted to the Scouts. So when I was 16, I joined a leadership development program, like this one. And I asked myself, okay, there is fear in myself, but what about the rest of the kids all over the country that don't have friends? And I decided that I want every kid in my country, and it doesn't matter what kind of disability he has, to have friends, to see himself and to feel himself as a meaningful person in the society, like Fear was. I'm saying was because, as I said, he passed away almost 6 years ago, when he was 11 and a half year old, when I was here in India. And for me, he was my greatest teacher and my greatest leader. And, and today, 10 years ago, it was, I was 16 when I started my organization, and I decided I want to create the first and only youth movement that will integrate kids and teenagers with regular kids like myself, like I was, and I wanted them together to do for the society. And like you said, today we have 22 branches all over the country. Each one of those branches was established by a teenager, a 15, 16-year-old kid. And if I can say, in 2009, we got the presidential award from our president, Shimon Peres, for leading social change in Israel. And for me, each one of the kids in Crumble Wings is a leader, is an ethical leader. And I know, and I'm sure that if we will only add the opportunity, and we'll have the chance, and we'll get people the chance to do something, and it doesn't matter what it is, as long as it fits their passions, then they'll be able to create a change.
That's great. I think one of the things you said that struck me was this whole society doesn't see it this way, and that prevented, him from being able to pursue those things. So I'm going to flip my hat really quick, because I was supposed to be a panelist, so I had prepared a couple intro stories as well. And it was one, just from my view of ethics from a self perspective, and the second from a group perspective. And the group, I think, really relates to sort of your example of society and kind of how you can mold that. So from the very beginning, one of the things that we did in our company was really trying to understand what is success. So as we did research and looked deeper and deeper, we found something very simple and profound. For every single one of us, success is making both your father and mother proud. So in life, we will all work to make both our father and mother proud, and they both are proud for different reasons. Fathers are proud of us when we achieve. We graduate. We built a nonprofit that went to 22 branches. We're authors of books. We've got promoted. Fathers like achievement. But mothers are most proud of us when we're happy ourselves and are kind to others. And it's this balance of the two that I believe creates ethics. So I have a personal story really quick on a self perspective. So when I was a child, growing up in Nigeria and West Africa, I was 6 years old when we got there. And we lived in this campus with 100 different families from 40 different countries who were all scientists doing agricultural research. And everyone's house was filled with wild fruit trees. If you ever see wild fruit, they're like tiny fruit with like no juice. I mean, this is like the worst fruit you can imagine. And the campus has been around, and so 3 years the market buys mangoes and tangerines and oranges and starts drying the seeds. And then one day when I'm 9 years old, I see her digging a hole in the ground and planting mango trees, orange trees, papaya trees, and I come out like furious. And as a 9-year-old, I look at my mom and say, "You are so foolish. We're going to be gone in 2 to maybe 5 years. Trees take 10 years to grow. Why are you planting seeds for trees?" And she looks at me and says something so simple, which is, because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do, and if you look at every house, the reason why they don't have any good fruit is because no one's done this. So whether we are here or not, it's the right thing to do, plants the trees. We lived in Nigeria for 17 years. The later half of the time, I spent so much time hearing from others about this genius mother I had, the only mother who had the insight to think so far in advance, plant trees, and we had fruit that literally made our house look like Adam and Eve in the garden early on. I mean, it was crazy. So it's a lesson I've stuck and kept with me, which is do what's right. The second story is around group, and this comment you made about society doesn't see it this way. A very close friend of mine I met recently over the last couple of years, guy became close friends, is a guy by the name of Wes Moore. So Wes Moore wrote a book recently called The Other Wes Moore. It became a New York Times bestseller. And Wes Moore, incredible background. He Rhodes Scholar, a White House Fellow. He became a captain of a platoon in the Army. He actually has a show now with Oprah Winfrey, so amazing accolades. And one day, he picks up the paper, because he grew up in Baltimore, is single mother, in a very poor neighborhood in Baltimore. And he sees that there's a guy with the exact same name, Wes Moore, who literally was arrested for robbing a jewelry store, shot a man, and just got sentenced to life imprisonment. Exact same name, and when he reads, everything's the exact same. They grew up in the exact same neighborhood. They're both single parents, came out of poverty. And so it struck him, and he started writing letters and corresponding and spent 10 years then visiting this Westmore in jail. And he had this profound conversation one day with him. So the Westmore I know asked the Westmore in jail, are we a product of our environment? Right? We grew up, right, in neighborhoods, single mothers, poor. Are we a product of our environment? And the Westmore in prison said the most profound thing. We're not a product of our environment. We're a product of our expectations. We are a product of our expectations. Everyone expected me to be a drug addict. Everyone expected me to eventually shoot someone, end up in jail for life, and that's exactly what I became. And they furthered their discussion and said, well, how do we change our expectations of ourselves? And what they came to very quickly is who you surround yourself with. Your mentors, friends. The better half of Shiv, Ms. Kemka, said something very simple to me this trip, which was, we are the sum of the 5 people closest to us. And you make that choice. You can choose who you surround yourself with. You can choose to surround yourself with people who stroke your ego, tell you you're great, or you can choose to surround yourself with people who say, you can do better than that. I expect more from you. And the Westmore I know did exactly that, and he ended up becoming what he is. The other Westmore is in life imprisonment. So I thought it was just an interesting segue to what you said. But I would love to go back to a discussion we had up there to Nitya, where we talked about war, men at war, and this notion of ethics with war. And would love for you to share some of the discussion we had there.
No, my question is ethics. I come from a culture where the Bhagavad Gita is considered a primer for anything and everything, justify anything and everything. There, we are given instructions on evolution in a battlefield. And when Arjuna wanted to be the peaceful guy, leader walking out of war and let them take the land, Krishna insists that he should fight the war. Now, many of us, I heard, even Gandhiji, could not tackle this problem of why violence? Why violence? And that too, a kind of Gandhiji respected and called the Gita his mother. How is it that he could not understand the ethics behind Krishna coercing Arjuna into war by sweet-talking him and bringing him back to his, what do you call it, the chivalrous, like the Roman knights and all, the Kshatriya, dynamics in him. So I was told by my teacher that it's because Gandhiji still continued to see us as name and form, and Krishna only saw us as souls in a form.
And when we're upstairs, you were talking about, obviously, men at war.
Men at war.
And people who will say that, shooting 10 people, and this whole notion of ethics and how, we are the only society that...
Yeah, ethics. I mean, so look at us. We are the only species which kill one another. There's no war amongst the animals or other, is there?
Yes. No, it's absolutely right. We're the only species...
So, how do you justify war? Where's ethics? What ethics do we have? Are we going to get rid of wars? We've stockpiled so much of weapons and we still talk about peace programs, right? Yes. We are thinking of fragmenting ourselves more and more. And also another interesting thing in this morning discussion is you had seemed to not agree with bringing over the past into the future. But man is an evolution, and what are our gains from the past has to be expressed differently in the future. So we cannot put aside a whole body of human endeavor, the rich human endeavor, which are stored in our wisdom books, and ignore it completely just for, I think it's a very fragmented kind of a thing. So let the audience ask some questions. We can't go on.
But I think what's interesting on the comment of war was, Adi, I think you made this comment about joining the Israeli army and how one of the first things they do when you join is actually a 3-month course on ethics. Would love for you to share some of what they teach, what you learn. I mean, even the idea behind it. I mean,
well, I'm not such a great... I'm not a professional for Army matters, but Yeah, every soldier in Israel, and it doesn't matter what you do. I went to the army band and I played the guitar. So it doesn't matter what you do in the army. You start by joining this course, and one of the things, along the other things that they teach you, is ethics, and that at the end of the road, you have all those rules and all those stuff, but your conscience is the higher boss, and they train you by bringing all kinds of dilemmas and stuff like that.
Can you give us for instance, that would give us a flavor? I don't know if you remember, like an
Wow.
exercise or a test or.
Narkis, maybe you can help you with this one. What?
Please.
Or should we get you a mic, maybe?
You can speak, I can repeat. Or no.
Okay, so I think one thing to remember is that most of your commanders, you're coming to the army when you're 18, they're like 19, okay? So it's not like you're speaking with people that are, basically they're doing what they've been told. And I remember a time when we were speaking about the Second Lebanon War, and she explained us the rationale of the war, and there's no such thing, right, like you said. And one of the things she said, and this war was horrible, like soldiers didn't have what to eat. It didn't make any sense. Like the army was not ready for it. And I remember I asked her, so she needed to explain to us why is this war happening. So we have like a conscious rationale of that. And I remember I said, yeah, but so many soldiers died and also people from both sides and nothing was seriously accomplished. But then she said, yeah, but more people from their side died. And then I said, yeah, but it's not like a Tetris game or something like that. It doesn't make sense. And I started crying. And then she didn't know what to do, and the discussion changed. So basically, I think it demonstrates, it's just one example of a lot of things that happens there, but basically, it's not like there's, this course Adi is speaking about, all the time, people there try to justify what's happening. It's not about Israel being wrong, Lebanon being right. It's just when you have an army, things that are crazy happen and people try to explain it and you always get stuck because it doesn't make sense. Now, it's not that I have an alternative. Like, if we don't have an army, I don't know what will happen. But you get these ethical dilemmas on a daily basis. I was in the intelligence unit and I actually saw in my eyes things that happen that I see in movies. And I'm like, in the intelligence unit, I'm seeing it happening from the side and you're asking yourself, what can I do? It's such a big system. My personal note is, I think you need to be part of it and to see it for making a change. But all the time you have these ethical dilemmas, ethical conversations, and it feels that there's not a lot to be done. But you have stories in history that one person changed things and stuff like that. But it's actually interesting. I never thought about it, that Adi is right. They bring you in the beginning, you're just a soldier, and the language they speak to you is ethics. But then when you start asking questions, it just doesn't make sense, So I think...
Yeah, but
Exactly.
I think that sorry. I want to take this conversation out of the political and these, and I want to say that even in a situation of war, which is, you can say, like you just said, that it's a conflict between ethics, and even in this place, you can find the boundaries of ethics, even in those places, and I feel that's the most important thing, and it's really at the end of the day between you and yourself.
Right. And there was an interesting discussion. I think, I don't know if you're going to...
I just want to say, I'm probably trying to take the discussion only from ethics to ethics and leadership. I completely agree with Mrs. Menon that it is a variable, it is contextual, it depends on time. But would really love to hear thoughts from people as well. That in those particular contexts, what is strong leadership then all about? How does in those particular contexts, how do you become ethical? As well as bring that conviction of being a leader, because eventually if you do not have that conviction, if you do not have that rationale by which you can have a moral conscience, which probably at times can come from learning scriptures in the past, the wisdom which is there, at times from your experiences and at times from naturally to people. I think
I'd love for you to comment where I think one of the discussions we had upstairs was this whole notion of being selfish. Because I think even in many ways about war, it's about your country against some other country. And I'd love you to maybe share with some of the audience some of the discussions where what role does that play? Because the word selfish has a very negative connotation.
Yeah, so Charlie, as we were discussing upstairs as well, I think the whole idea of leadership has to start from breaking this whole shackle of I, and involving everybody around you. But then again, going back, to that being a strong leader, because I just remember this very interesting incident. I was working in a corporate. I had a boss, and she was her husband joined non-profit, and I told her, you know what, I also want to join not-for-profit sector. She said, why don't you do it today? So I said, oh, but today I've got so many responsibilities, this, that, and I just cannot take that step. So she asked me, can you kill me? I wanted to kill her, obviously, but I couldn't say yes. I said, no, obviously I can't kill you. And then she said, okay, what if I tomorrow come to your house and kill your parents? Would you then kill me? I said, obviously I'll kill you. Right? So I think, and then she told me this. She said, that means that today you do not have strong enough conviction or reasons for you to believe that you need to shift into not-for-profit sector. And these are all excuses then. We rationalize what is ethical based on what our convenience is at times. And I think a strong leader has to be the one who can come above these. And we all have been party to some of these weaknesses at times. But I guess the whole idea of a strong leader has to who can come above all of these, come over this whole concept of I, not give to those temptations, not take those exceptions, and come with very strong conviction, because if the leader is not strong, followers would never come.
Right. I would say as a boss myself, I am scared to ask that question to any of my followers of will you kill me, for fear that they may say, can I go first? But,
I can't agree more. I so much wanted to.
Yeah, I'd love for you to comment. I know when we were leaving the room, we talked about this whole notion of society versus the world, and this notion of responsibility, ethics.
I feel that, we have a social conscience which necessarily need not be the highest. And usually we are like hypnotized by that conscience, and we decide what's right to do and what's not right to do. We have in our cultural background many books talking on ethics and morality. I, for one, have committed all the 10 commandments I have not obeyed in my life. And if I'm unethical because of that, well, that's again contextual. The Ramayana, which is a moral ethical code for us, was written by a thug who converted to a great spiritual writer. Vyasa, who codified the Vedas and gave us the great Mahabharata, which people are just getting patents and the problem of good and evil, etc., etc. Vyasa himself raises his arms and says, oh my God, I'm so discontented because I'm not able to convey to humanity what is good and what is evil, what is dharma and what is adharma in our language. So he meets this great sage, Narada, who comes and says, boss, instead of breaking your head over what is ethical, what is non-ethical, come on, focus on your vision and everything becomes ethical. Just focus on your vision and becomes ethical. And that's how we as a race were initiated into the emotional, the heart side of spiritual endeavor. And we got the great text from Vyasa called the Bhagavad.
I can imagine in the audience, though, like especially with the students, they'd say, well, what is that vision?
Exactly.
Right? What is the vision that would make me become...
But that's personal. That's again like Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Sure.
When you're at the survival level, your ethics is different.
But if you had to give sort of our young leaders any guidance, because I agree it's personal, but if you had to give any guidance to our young leaders in the pursuit of that vision, what would you...
Well, I have a very democratic view. I think we all have a learning curves, and we should be allowed to grow according to our learning curves.
Okay.
So I don't think thou shalt not.
Okay.
It doesn't work with.
So there's no pursue a woman leader in your life?
I've got to interject here.
Yeah.
Because I strongly disagree.
Pardon?
So I said I strongly disagree. So I need to interject.
Okay.
Because I can't hold myself back. So sorry.
No, no, this is great.
But-
We want
We
disagreement.
were looking
Yeah.
for
We're
people
looking
who
for
disagree with us.
some.
To say that your vision will automatically create ethical ethical path, I completely disagree with that. Hitler had a vision. Stalin had a vision. Did they create an ethical path?
But Hitler's vision, however negative it was, it brought the world together, us together, against a
Well-
force, exactly what the Mahabharata did.
Well, I think this is a good comment. Is morality relativist? How much relativism is there in morality? These are the questions everyone needs to think about. Each one of us has to make those decisions. I personally think that there are some issues that are gray, but there are some issues that are black and white. And so I think, what is ethics? I think all the young people here need to really think hard, because I don't think Hitler led an ethical life. I don't consider him a great leader for that reason. I don't consider Alexander the Great a great leader. We call him Alexander the Great. I consider Gandhi a great leader. Mandela a great leader who was in prison for 22 years, came out of prison and forgave. That's the quality of leadership that I would call great leadership. So
It's a
I
very-
don't know. I think
there's a
I
very
think it's a
interesting-
very low standard to say that each of us can decide, and whatever it is we feel fine, that's ethical leadership. I strongly disagree with that.
Which means that you still agree that a society which is controlled and honed by force, be it military or the police, and follow ethical laws, is an evolved society? Where is democracy there? You call that an evolved society?
So there was an interesting quote that I researched this morning, where it was a 19th century historian, it's Lord Acton, who said, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to say that all great men, or just that great men are almost always bad men. This whole notion, and coupled with that, I found this other study done by Forbes magazine, and it was talking about ethical lapses, when it occurs. They found it consistently is confined to a few people. And it's at the apex of the organization. And when you look at these aggressive acts of dishonesty where they destroy their careers and even their organization, it's almost always generally executed by a very few senior people. And so the whole question that came about was, how do you prevent that type of leadership?
I think, I kind of, agree with him as well. I generally don't think that, we should rationalize even goodness and badness, because, if you get into that path, you can rationalize anything in the world, right? Then there should be no concept of good or bad, Where I agree with Mrs. Menon is at particular point of time, I think there has to be a common intelligence of the society which has to decide this is good, and people have to then live within those boundaries. You cannot, at a particular, otherwise, we're going towards what a jungle raj can be, right? Because then everybody is right, everybody has a right way to do it, and everybody can probably rationalize it. Right? So when you're talking about vision, I think in this particular context, what should be the vision which is for the common happiness of this world as a whole, where certain laws, certain rules have been decided, and people do stay to those and do not give to those temptations, because every time we give to one temptation, as you said, power corrupts, we would have a very corrupt society. So are we going towards a corrupt society, or do we want a better world for us, is a choice that all of us have to make. And I strongly believe that if we do not have that conviction to say what is right, what is wrong, and then stay to those right things in right ways, we are actually going towards a very, a very dangerous side of it, where a complete democracy then can also be an evil democracy, that let your evil thoughts come out and do whatever they want to do.
But if I may challenge that a little bit, it sounds like you're almost avoiding it sounds like avoidance, like sort of, black and white, no, yes and no, no, but like sort of saying there is, there is bad and there is good, there's evil, but you're saying in some cases where evil is good, like Hitler, if you try to argue that Hitler actually...
We're just looking at the other side. We're not saying Hitler is good or bad. I'm saying you bring about so much of destruction anywhere it's not good. But like Mr. Khemka said, but then, you see, we have to see both sides. We bonded, though we were British colonies, we bonded to go against Hitler.
Well, the Jewish want to say something.
Yeah, this we're
Well-
building up to.
The way I see it is that there is bad, and there is good, and there is evil, and the way I see it personally. And, you know, it doesn't matter now, we can discuss, we can have a whole discussion about Hitler. By the way, he was vegetarian.
Vegetarian?
Yes.
Of course.
So we can have a whole discussion about Hitler and, you know, his morals and or being, you know, one of the most evil and, you know, leaders in the history. I want to go back, if I might, to what you said. I feel that if you want to lead, it starts with the vision, right? For me, when I was 16, I didn't even know to say the word vision. I didn't know, you know, I learned this world vision when I was 20. But I knew that I want to create something different. I knew that I want children in my country to have childhood, simple childhood. And it starts, if you want to lead, and I didn't know to say, I didn't want to say to, I didn't know to say to myself that I want to lead even, right? But I wanted to do something different, and I want to create something different, and it starts with the vision. Ethics, when you start to lead, you have the responsibility of acting in a certain way, and ethics is a huge part of it, because personally I cannot do certain things because I lead a big community in my country, and it will be unethical for me to act in a certain way. And I take this responsibility once I decide that I want to create a different in my country.
But the part I think that's interesting is this comment. So we'll open up the questions in 1 second, but just really quick, I know we talked about this whole, what history plays in all this. And I think it's fascinating where you talked about vision, yet when I think about really your story, the 11-year-old, you know, that you got to know, that was the source of your vision. Like if that was not in your life, that it was not in your history, there would be no, you know, drive, motivation, sort of the grit to...
Yeah, so it goes back to selfishness.
Right.
I feel that, you know, on one hand, you know, I had fear that this kid, and I knew that I want to create something different,
Sure.
and I saw the lack of social life for kids and children, teenagers with disabilities. But on the other hand, I had my needs, and I had the personal place that I came from, and I wanted my parents to be proud of me, and I wanted to create a place when my father could see himself as a meaningful person, and I wanted to create a new family for myself because I didn't have a family at that time. So you can say that everything came from a very selfish place, and I would agree, by the way, because I think it goes together, and it's how you use your selfishness and what do you do with it, right?
I think we have a lot of questions in the audience. You wanna-
Yes, sir. This is a follow-up on the questions on soldiers. I'm a former soldier, a proud one at that. I'm giving a context, a situation to the panel. He's a young army officer, 25 years old, a young captain with a group of 30-odd men. He has been told that there is a militant, there are a group of militants in a house. This is in Jammu and Kashmir, real-life incident. He goes in there, he goes, as per protocol, goes and meets the family members. The family members have been told by the militants, they have put a gun onto their heads, if you talk about it, we'll kill you. The officer goes in, speaks to them and says, koi militant hai kya? Is somebody there? They answer no. He comes out, within the next 3 minutes, 6 of his men are killed. Do we think about human rights? How does that young captain deal with it ethically? He's got about 2 minutes before the rest of the men are killed. How does he respond? What is the ethical and leadership issue here? I will request all the panelists to answer this question. Thank you for your time.
Anyone have a?
Do what is right and for a larger good. Take a decision based on what is right for a larger good.
My 6 men are killed.
Yes.
My instant moment is I should just get the whole group of houses onto fire.
Absolutely.
To hell with ethics.
Yeah.
My 6 men have died because this lady here has said there is no militant.
You have to be a Christ if you do not shoot.
That's right. So my point is, look at the other side. There is a lady there.
Yeah.
If she says there are militants here, she'll be killed by them or others. How does the army officer, and we have
So-
all
so
these
if I
human rights
understand-
rackets happening, how do you resolve the
think you should
dilemma?
answer.
And how do you act within those next 3 minutes?
Because it sounds like the
It's
question
not
is
an
around-
air-conditioned hall, sir. The bullets are flying around you.
Yeah.
I think that we can create a list of ethical dilemmas from different fields, and it will be a very long list of dilemmas, of stories of situation like the one that you presented now, which is obviously a very difficult dilemma. And I feel that there are many elements that are, you know, especially in situation of war or, you know, so I can say about the army that in many of those situations you have sort of a rules to follow because the emotional situation that you're in a specific moment is that you cannot make the right decision sometimes because of the emotions or because of you cannot see the big pictures and many other stuff.
But you know something, Adi, that you said, but you know what's interesting is,
I would shoot. I would shoot.
so
I would shoot. Colonel, I would shoot an order of. Yeah, absolutely.
she likes Hitler too, though.
Yes, I think
I would like to humbly suggest that all leaders must understand that our mind is an extremely limited instrument, guided all the time by our senses. And the mind also influences the senses, and we are driven by senses. Our mind is an extremely limited instrument, and we should recognize that. And if you have this humility, then you would connect yourself to something which is beyond your mind.
But that is not.
And-
The vision is supposed to be beyond your mind.
Yeah, so the vision
So there's something
has
that,
to be
that Adi
dictated by
said.
something beyond your mind. And if you will accept the idea that there is something beyond your mind, I think many of the ethical decisions
Because
that you
our
need to
discussion
make
is very
are resolved.
intellectual. Yeah, yes, sir.
But I think there's something Adi said that I loved, which is in the Israeli army, you said that as they teach you this 3-month course in ethics, they teach you about consciousness and how above everything, there's only one boss.
But that's not true. All these laws sometimes make people do horrible decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't help, okay? These rules have, like, war crimes happening because of people. So there is no logic situation when you have an army and you have a war. Like, people will do mad
Yes,
things.
but inside the situation of war, which is a very unethical or
Here's a
a
question way back.
situation, you can find the boundaries of ethics.
I agree
And
with
I
them
feel and I feel that it doesn't, in a way, and it's not about Israeli, it's not about armies. It's a very general.
It's generally war.
It's
I'm going to
general
move to
thing
I'm going to move to a
that-
question here. Maybe an after coffee talk for all the war
Yeah,
discussion
I think
in
it's
that
a-
corner.
it's a
So
higher
can I say
level.
just one thing? I think something important for me to say. I think it's very easy now to say Hitler was not ethical, Stalin was not ethical. But think about, I'm sorry, soldier. So I'm saying, I think we should all be aware to the not unethical things that are happening in the world today, okay?
Yeah.
In China, for example, is it ethical to work in China? Do you know what's happening in China, the strongest country in the world? Is it ethical to work with this government? I don't know, okay? I'm not saying it as a person that has all the picture, but I'm saying it as because I'm aware of part of the concentration camps that exist there, for example.
So the war
one-
discussion
one
afterwards.
picture.
We'll continue. This is great. We have a question.
Quick questions. Mr. Kim, you told us the story in which your mother said that's the right thing to do. Could you define from your perspective what is the right thing? Define the right thing for me. Second quick question to Ma'am Menon. Could you comment on contextual or circumstantial ethics, that is Paristiti Dharma?
That is?
Paristiti Dharma.
I didn't get the last.
I didn't get the
Paristhiti dharma.
Parasthiti dharma, yeah. That is circumstantial, a particular circumstance.
So I think in what I think about the right thing to do, one way I think about it, literally sometimes I ask myself, what would my mother do? Very simple question. And I think there's a purity in our moms that makes you do the right thing, even in uncertain situations when you ask, what would my mother do? And there's a balance where she cares about my happiness, but cares equally for me being kind to others. You were asking that?
I would say that, you see, one thing we have to clearly understand, that we as a human society evolved through 3 definite principles. One is that of struggle. We still struggle against those who are not gifted, and the ones who are gifted, how with compassion we can transform and bring them up, elevate them, let us say, and not out of arrogance, out of humility and sharing, getting all of us out of our selfish needs, let us say. And second is through the principle of cooperation or concert, which is a key thing in mutuality, let us say. And the ethics for the struggle part, ethics for the mutual part is different. And then comes the ultimate, the law of sacrifice, where it is only sacrifice and no expectation for any results. These are the 3 principles by which our ethical dharma changes.
Is there a question back there?
Yeah, hi. So my question has to do a little bit with what we were discussing earlier about how society should decide or hypothetically decide that this is ethical and this is not. But what do you do in a situation where, say, your personal ethics may not be in tandem with the ethics that society has set out for you, because that way social norms are also tied in with ethics, right? So how do you find a balance, A, between your personal belief or your personal ethical thinking and what society thinks is ethical, which is something that we've sort of discussed. And also, secondly, because I believe that a leader or someone who's influential, I think the main point of being a leader is that you are that one person that sort of stands out. But when society is discussing or defining that this is ethical and this is not, doesn't that sort of constrict the whole process of evolution and development? So where is that compromise, or how do you compromise between personal ethics and what society thinks is ethical?
You want to comment?
Yeah, so I'll answer to that thing, but before that, I just wanted to make a point. I think our discussion is going into the 10% of very tough cases, whereas what I understand is there are some very young people here. I fail to understand, can we in 90% of cases clearly define good and bad? Is kindness not good? Is being good to others not good, right? And I seriously want all of us to go away from here talking about that, yes, there is goodness defined in 99% of the cases. There would be this ambiguity in 1% of the cases, and you deal with it. That is where strong leadership comes in. You need to have certain value system, fight for it. Sir, if you have to fire, please fire at that point of time, right? But let's also figure out that there is a 90% solution for which we have to very strongly stand for. What is good, you can define 99% of the time what is good. 1% of the time you cannot let it be. If we focus on this 99%, we can make a much better world. I really want to make that point because it scares me if the discussion goes towards what we cannot do. Let's just focus on what can we do. And in that, what is leadership is very important.
Right. And I think once again, to answer your question, the word society, who is that? I think it's easy to pick a word and it's not people, it's just this thing. Which is why I come back to your environment. It's amazing how you control your own environment. You can choose who you surround yourself with. And it's amazing what that does. Where when you look at the whole collapse of Enron, they interviewed the employees. Did you know you were doing wrong? And they said, yes, I knew I was doing wrong. But the environment was set up where it was rewarding, recognizing that behavior. And so that peer pressure made them do wrong. So I think, when I think about society, I think about the 5 people surrounding you. Make sure they are people that you would look up to.
Charlie, I have a slightly different view there. I think, if you have to be a leader, don't give up to environment. You create your own value judgment of what is right and wrong. I think it's very clearly defined for 90% of the cases, and then you need to have that spinal cord to stand. And to say that with conviction, I believe this is right and I'm going to do this. And in situations which are tough, go with that gut feeling. Right? I remember these, the two lines of a poet, Mr. Harvansh Rai Bachchan. He says, मैं तो उनके साथ खड़ा हूँ जिनकी सीधी होती रीढ़, चाहे वो अकेले हो, चाहे हो उनके साथ भीड़. Right? It is about.
I didn't quite follow that.
Sorry, right?
Beautiful.
This poet says that this is from a follower's perspective, this is not from a leader perspective. He said, I as a follower want to stand behind a leader who has got a spinal cord which is straight, who can take decisions. Whether he's alone or he's with a crowd, I would stand with him. And I think that's where I really want to bring this discussion around leadership and ethics together and make it more positive, because we're talking about some very young people who can just change this country. Please, let's look at it in a very positive way.
Thank you. I'd actually recently taken a course on corporate social responsibility and ethics, which was basically 4 months of discussions just on cases like Colonel Shaker brought up. I don't really want to get into that. But what I need to sort of understand from your point of view is, Mr. Kim mentioned for him, acting ethically is like what his mom would do or what would make his father and mother proud. Are there any prescribed rules that each of you have that you sort of follow when you're faced with such dilemmas?
I can start. So for me, first rule for me is I accept that in 10% of the cases I don't know what to do. I go with my gut feeling. But in 90% of the cases, yes, I have a value system. And most of the time, this ethical dilemma comes in very black and white, sir. It is not in that gray area for most of our life. So I know I don't want to be corrupt in life. I know that I want to make life of people around me better. It makes me, and the moment I take the focus from I to us, in 95% of the cases, believe me, I get an answer, right? The question can be, should I take money from someone? If it is only helping me, that's wrong. So my fundamental principle is it helping I versus us? Most of the time, moment I focus from I to shift my focus from I to us, I'm able to take a decision.
I think the key to that word, when I hear corporate social responsibility, I say drop the word social. It's about responsibility. And I was just emailing my wife back and forth and telling her the pressure I felt to give a good talk, to be on the panel because of who's in the audience. And I was telling her what I was doing, no sleep because of jet lag, and she kept saying, how do you do it? And I was telling her, actually, I feel guilty because I look at what Shiv is doing. And I find out that he's up till 3 a.m. challenging you guys in your presentation to make you guys better as an individual and as a team. And it's amazing what responsibility will do. But you have to own it. You have to feel it. So I know we have to wrap up. So I want to end with an email I got from a very close friend of mine named Bob Chapman. And he's the CEO of a 7,000-person manufacturing company. And he sent me this note, which couldn't be more apropos for this discussion. So he said, people's lives are entrusted to us. We need to be good stewards of those lives. Allow them to discover, develop, share, and be appreciated for their gifts, so they can return home fulfilled and be good stewards of the lives entrusted to them. We are stewards of those lives entrusted to us. So with that, thank you very much. That was one more.
Okay, just real quickly, I think this has been a great discussion. I would recommend that we talk about the temporality of ethics, because there is a social discourse that goes with ethics, and it changes, of course, over time. I mean, we were all referencing the period of World War II. What happened there in terms of the number of political deaths would be so completely unacceptable in today's context that we use it as a pivot point in history in terms of the emergence of the inviolability and the fundamental dignity of human beings. And so I think we need to think about the discourse that we're having within a temporal context and recognize that by the virtue of this conversation, that it is processual, that we are actually creating norms about social behaviors by having conversations like this. And that 100 years from now, this conversation will most certainly seem unethical by the people who inhabit the planet. Because they will say, but at the same time, they had lunch and ate animals. Or at the same time, there were people living in poverty all amidst them, et cetera, et cetera. So we can always throw ourselves into the past and project a judgment. But we also have to throw ourselves and imagine ourselves in the future and how that will change. And I think that's what pushes us to think differently about ethical matters. So thank you.
Just to say that the three questions that they ask you about your question is who it affects and how, what will be the consequences in the short and long term, and what would your mother do, by the way? Yeah.
Just to add, Charlie, I think there's when we talk about this I versus us and taking it to us, there is a it's a very theoretical concept because when you have to execute it, and I work for a foundation, right? When we are trying to help poor people, we want to give them suboptimal products. When I'm trying to help my own child, I want the best over there. So even when you're talking about this concept of taking from I to us, we have to assume that it is as if I have to give it to my own child. What decisions would I take? And especially when it comes to, you talked about CSR, as I said, I've worked on corporate, on CSR, and on a pure play foundation. I really wanted to share this with you that every time you look at a problem, just think of what is the best possible solution that you would have done for yourself, and then try to make it happen. And that is where your energy, this youth would come into play and would solve problems for the country.
Do unto yourselves what you have others do unto you. It's very simple and straight.
He asked good questions.
I do have one last question, and I know we've been playing this game for like 5 minutes. But I wrote this down because I didn't want to forget it. This is my question for all panelists, and starting with Mr. Kim. History is written by the victors. Gandhi goes down in history as a great man fighting for peace and change for the better, not an insubordinate fighting for his own agenda. George Washington was a revolutionary who founded the most free, powerful empire to rule the modern era. He isn't the tyrant who tried to end the British Empire. The leaders we call evil are the leaders who lost: Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini. Ethics is a lens, and we see it through the scope of history that we wrote, where we are the winners, fighting for good, fighting for peace, fighting against the evil that disagrees with what we call ethics. Do you disagree with this statement? History is written by the victors and ethics defined by the champions. Why or why not?
So there's a fascinating thing that I learned when you joined the U.S. Marines. Half the training is more physical, guns and lifting weights and whatnot. The other half is actually history. Like the most elite forces in the U.S., they spend 50% of the time being trained in history, the origins of the Marines. And the reason is because the longer there is history, it's a predictor of what the future looks like. If you have no history, you don't know what the future is going to be. But the history gives you this responsibility to continue what was started way before you. Life didn't start when you came. It started way before. But what I found interesting about telling origin stories, there's so much detail in history. I mean, if I went to you and told you about my life even just this morning, I could take, 8 hours telling you second by second what I did. You can choose what to tell. And I think part of the responsibility of leadership is telling the right origin stories. You look back in time and you find the things that are examples of what you want others and what you want to carry forward. And I think that's what can create a better future.
So do you agree?
So I agree in that history is a critical part, but once again, I think there's a responsibility on leaders to pick the right stories within.
I think I don't care about history, really, right? And probably it has been written like that. I really don't care about it. I think what is in front of us is today and what we can do in future. We have to do it in right ways. Probably right guys lost in the future, in the past. I just don't care. That doesn't mean that I need not be right and I need not do right set of things in future. Even if you go back to history, I think if you look at different contexts, at least in Indian mythology, I can say even the bad side who have lost, there are leadership qualities that are being talked about. But having said that, I still believe I don't know whether the statement is right or wrong, because it has to be. I come from a corporate side. Whatever is past is actually sunk cost. I work with startups. Last 2 years, losses, everything in red. We just don't care about that. You have to move forward. Let's talk about how can we make this society a better place. Rest for me is just not relevant.
Yeah, do you have a comment?
I think mothers should take over.
Okay, Adi,
it was brilliant, man. That was awesome. Yeah, and I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to
Thank you so much for your inspiring moral perspective. We now present a token of our gratitude to our panelists for today. Mr. Charlie Kim. Miss Adi Altschuler, Miss Nitya Menon, and Mr. Satyam Dharmora. Ladies and gentlemen, may we please have a round of applause.